This is a short video tutorial on how to write a report for mediation. I have asked my students to run the mediation analysis I have demonstrated in YouTube, and I have asked them to try and write a report which should include the objective of the study, the hypothesis, the statistical technique used, the total effect, the result of the mediation analysis, both for the indirect effect and the remaining direct effect, the percentage mediation, and the meaning of the results. So this is the output from Jamovi. So we have here the indirect effect, which is our evidence for mediation. We have here the residual effect after mediation, and this is the total effect, which is basically the sum of these two effects. And in here are our path estimates. We have here path A from the IV to the mediator, which is significant. Path B from the mediator to the outcome, which is also significant. And the residual or the direct effect. I have broken down the write-up submitted by my student. So this is the write-up, and I've broken it down into parts. So this is what my student submitted, and this is the improvements that I have made from the submitted report. So for the objective, the student said, this study was conducted to examine the impact of passion for sports on well-being and to know if sports participation is a mediating variable. So this is okay. I simply tried to improve it by saying this study was conducted to examine the impact of passion for sports on well-being as mediated by sports participation. So I basically simplified what he said. For the hypothesis, the student said it was hypothesized that being passionate in sports will have a significant relationship with well-being. Additionally, it was predicted that sports participation will mediate this relationship. The only improvement I made is I specified this part wherein the student said that passion for sports is significantly related to well-being by specifying the direction. So I said it was hypothesized that being passionate in sports will positively predict well-being. And then the other statement that he said, additionally, it was hypothesized that sports participation will mediate this relationship. For the analysis, my student said mediation analysis was carried out to test these hypotheses. As with moderation analysis, there really is no statistical technique that can be referred to as mediation analysis. What Jamovi is running, though, is a series of regression analysis. So that is what I said instead. So I said a series of regression analysis were carried out to test these hypotheses. So first I asked him to talk about the total effect. The student said the results show that passion for sports has a significant total effect on well-being. I tried to specify this and gave it a bit of a direction, and I changed some of the values here. So what I said is that the result shows that passion for sports positively predicts well-being. He used the notation E, which is because the output states estimate, but that is actually the unstandardized regression coefficient. So the correct notation is B. And then instead of the SE, what I included is the Z value. But in some cases, I've also seen manuscripts wherein they show the standard error, and I've also seen manuscripts that shows the statistic instead. So in here, I included the statistic. So this part is basically your path A. So this is the relationship between the IV and the DV prior to the mediation. For the result of the mediation analysis, so the student said, analyzing the indirect effects, results explain that there is a significant relationship between passion for sports and sports participation and between sports participation and well-being. So in this part, the student is discussing paths A and B. And then he says these results support the hypothesis and highlight that sports participation is a significant mediator for passion for sports. And then this is the coefficient for the indirect effect. And then the confidence interval. And then he talked about the remaining direct effect. As for the direct effect, the results suggest that even with a mediating variable, passion for sports still has significant effect on well-being. So this is how I try to edit that. I first discussed the indirect effect and then afterwards broke it down into paths A and B. So I said analyzing the indirect effects, results reveal that passion for sports significantly mediates the relationship between passion for sports and well-being. This is not really an unstandardized regression coefficient, so I will be correcting myself. So this should not be, this is the product of the coefficients for paths A and B. So the correct notation here actually is AB. So this suggests that 0.48, which is this value, is actually the product of 0.866 and 0.554, which is your paths A and B. So when you multiply that, you will have this value. So the correct notation for that, instead of B, because it's not really an unstandardized regression coefficient, but the product of two regression coefficients, then the notation should be AB. And this is actually your indirect effect. So this talks about the indirect effect. And then afterwards, I've broken down the indirect effect into paths A and B. So passion for sports positively sports positively affect sports participation affects. So I specify the direction, that is very important. And sports participation in turn positively affects well-being. So that is also important. I have used the term affect because the logic is that there is general acceptance that a mediation model is a causal model. So it wouldn't be wrong for you to say the word affect if a strong argument can really be made that we have a causal link among these variables. And then finally, I said, nevertheless, the results also suggest that even after accounting for the mediating role of sports participation, passion of sports still has a positive impact, again, specifying the direction on well being. So, this is your residual effect or your path C prime. It can also be noticed here that the student talked about several percent mediation, but the percent mediation that is really needed is the percent mediation accounted for by the indirect effect, which is not actually 34.6% as suggested by the student. The percent mediation is actually this one, 65.4. So that means to say that the influence or in the impact of sports participation to well-being, 65% of that is because of the mediator. It's because of sports participation. And what remains is 34.6%. So I said instead sports participation, which is our mediator, accounts for 65.4% of the total effect, which is the effect of passion for sports on well-being. And then finally, this is the meaning of the result. These findings provide some evidence that people who love and invest time and energy towards sports events, this is my definition of passion for sports, are more likely to be healthy, happy, and prosperous, which is my definition of well being, because they tend to engage in sports activities, which is my definition of sports participation. So, this is how I try to interpret the mediation or the indirect effect, saying that people who love sports are, have more well-being, partly because those who love sports also engage in sports themselves. And then I try to make meaning of the residual effect, or the direct effect. So I said, nevertheless, people's mere passion for sports still contributes to happiness, happiness beyond what is accounted for by sports participation. And then afterwards, we combine all of those statements. I've made some correction. This should be A, B. I have erased this part. What else did I correct? I've made a couple of corrections here. So I hope that you just adjust what those corrections I've made. I can't remember everything. So this is our complete report, and I hope that you learned something, and see you in the next tutorial.